Rebirth of a Movie Star. Author, J11, 22, 33. Chapter 1-5. Chapter 1. I'm telling you that it wasn't me. It's up to you if you want to believe it or not. The man's voice was low and husky and carried with it a strange feeling. Bai Lang had always been unable to like it. But right now what made Bai Lang's hands and feet feel even more cold was the meaning behind the sound of those words. If it's not you, then who? Bai Lang's throat felt dry. You're asking me? Seeing Bai Lang's tense appearance, the man's voice carried laughter. Shouldn't you be asking yourself? Bai Lang felt as though he had been hit over the head. He took an involuntary step backwards. The tall and imposing man in front of him bent his waist and picked up the remote control from the table. There was a noise and a TV that took up almost half of the wall lit up. Bai Lang's thoughts were still sunken into a chaotic emotional state, but the sound of the broadcast pierced his ears painfully. In regards to Kang Ji-eun's earlier press conference, Asia International's chief executive's daughter, heiress Shen Ling has also 10 minutes ago updated her website to publicly confirm to all the media the news of her engagement to Kang Ji-eun. Bai Lang suddenly raised his head. He stared disbelievingly at the television screen. The screen showed a press conference. The lights and cameras flashed constantly, showing Kang Ji-eun's unmistakably familiar face in high definition. There was a dazzling smile on that face. She is incredibly grateful for everyone's well wishes and also hopes that everyone will continue to support. Kang Ji-eun's road to fame has not been easy, and he has shown that he is an honest and sincere person who is also warm-hearted and gentle. As for those people who have spread heinous slanders about him and Bai Lang being gay in order to suppress Kang Ji-eun, Shen Ling expresses deep regret. After all, she has been in a relationship with Kang Ji-eun for 2 years. It's only that they didn't publicize until now. After hearing this, Bai Lang's entire person shook. Now that these two people had decided to come together to form a family and plan a future together, they hope that those slanders will settle down. As for the date of the wedding, taking into consideration that in the coming months Kang Ji-eun will be filming director Guo Shan's latest master, Peace Mountain Rain will come, she plans to have a simple wedding with Kang Ji-eun overseas. To have the support and well wishes of their friends and family is her greatest desire. She once again wishes to thank everyone for their support. The sound of the broadcast was incredibly crisp and clear. Each word was like a knife cutting into Bai Lang's heart. Bai Lang suddenly felt as though he couldn't breathe. Add to it the fact that he had had trouble sleeping for a week, and the vision in front of his eyes suddenly went black. In his chest a terrible pain tore through his heart. Bai Lang unconsciously clutched his left breast, crumpling his shirt. The man in front of his eyes looked shocked. He took a step closer. Normally Bai Lang would have backed away, but this time he found he couldn't. He could only double over painfully. In his ears the words wedding, dating, these type of words echoed repeatedly. The pain in his chest became worse and worse. It was so painful cold sweat appeared on his skin, and from his eyes tears fell out. His last impression was that the voice that he originally didn't like was yelling, filled with desperation. Bai Lang. The terrible pain made Bai Lang gasp. Then once again he woke up from a terrible nightmare. When he opened his eyes, he heard the sound of his own gasping and painful breathing sounding in the quiet room. Bai Lang lay on the bed. He stared dazed at the white ceiling lit by a street lamp from the window and listened to the sound of his own heart pumping furiously. Peng, peng, peng. It felt as though any minute now it would fail. After a long time, when his heartbeat had somewhat slowed down, Bai Lang finally rubbed his face and raised his body to drink a sip of water. There was a warm thermos beside his bed. In the last few days he had gotten into the habit of preparing one before going to bed. Only after feeling the warm liquid flow down his throat could let Bai Lang escape from the grasp of repeated nightmare he had night after night. However, if it was only just a nightmare, a dream, then how good would it be? And if it wasn't a dream, then how should he describe it? Bai Lang clutched the thermos, staring dazed into the darkness. His eyes turned, unbidden, again to the digital clock sitting on his bedside table. In the darkness, the illuminated numbers and words clearly showed, August 23rd, year 20XX. This was the summer of 10 years ago. The him that had died of a heart attack had somehow returned to 10 years previously. In the entertainment world 10 years into the future, although Bai Lang perhaps could not be considered a megastar, he was at least someone who had attained household name status. He had a warm and gentle image. In the broadcast of the long drama Partners for Life, he portrayed the role of a young single father. He held the hand of a 5-year-old little boy, and this image of father and son was carved deep into the hearts of the audience. This kind of suitable role helped shape his image. Bai Lang's fans came from all age groups, from small school students to old 70 or 80-year-old grandmothers and grandfathers. During a particular time, he was also considered every unmarried girl's dream good husband image representative. Suitably accompanying Bai Lang's image was his clean and warm appearance. He had white skin that never tanned, straight and glistening black hair, and full lips that carried with it a natural redness. He had a tall and slender figure and was a living example of a white-skinned and red-lipped scholar from a storybook. After Partners became a popular drama, it was extremely difficult for Bai Lang to shake off this image. This kind of advantage also had its limitations. In his next 5 dramas, Bai Lang's company arranged for him roles all of which showed him as a good and upright youth. It was unable to be changed. In the future all of his roles went in this direction, righteous, good and family-friendly. Thus Bai Lang's advancement was limited, however, since this image was suitable for many types of product. Endorsements. Bai Lang's rewards could have been said to be more than his losses. In terms of amount of taxes paid, in many years Bai Lang could have been accounted in the top 5 artistes, and can be considered an actor who worked hard for the aim of earning money. TN. This is a bit hard to translate. It's basically saying someone who accepts a lot of roles, not all of which are outstanding, in order to hunker down and slowly bit by bit grind out money. Not someone who is chasing achievement awards or to make waves. However, for someone like Bai Lang who had this kind of spotless image, even the slightest bit of slanderous rumors was extremely difficult to recover from. In these 10 years as an actor, Bai Lang had faced 3 great trials. The first time was not long after Partners for Life became famous. Because of the large debts of Bai Lang's brother Bai Li, his image suffered a blow. But after all, it was a problem of Bai Lang's family members and was not directly related to him, and so after Bai Lang appeared to help Bai Li clear his debts, he was able to pacify the talk about his low-class family background. However, due to this incident, his fame, which had only just begun to rise, was once again pulled back down. The second time Bai Lang became famous, it was after a few more years. At that time Bai Lang accepted a role in the reality cooking show Who is Hosting Dinner, and for the second time tasted the flavor of becoming famous. The friendly and handsome young man would carefully select ingredients and go to a famous star's home, help them cook, and host a dinner party for their guests. At the same time, the audience was able to see each star's luxurious homes and get a glimpse into their private lives. This plus the carefully selected menus and delicious delicacies made the show incredibly popular to mothers and grandmothers. At that time Bai Lang once again became the #1 male star that every woman wanted to marry. This was undoubtedly related to his cooking skills. Any company that was half related to cooking came knocking on Bai Lang's door to ask him to endorse their products. All the way until a fuzzy and unclear video was broadcasted on a popular video sharing site, accusing Bai Lang of often attending luxurious yacht parties to gamble and take drugs. These kind of serious accusations led to Bai Lang being investigated by the police. Although the investigation turned up no evidence to support these claims, Bai Lang's fortune took a second large blow. But the god of fortune had clearly taken an interest in Bai Lang after 2 quiet and lonely years where he didn't have much work. Bai Lang shot an MV for a love song, and once again audiences took note of this elegant, clean and gentle youth. At this time Bai Lang was someone who had been in the entertainment circle for many years. After the 2 previous tumultuous incidences of wind and rain, in which he had experienced the coldness of human hearts, he had learnt to become strong internally. This kind of inner strength and elegant bearing was not something a new young artist who had only experienced success could demonstrate. When he once again obtained a role as a second male lead in the movie Sunset, Bai Lang portrayed the tragic role of someone who was misunderstood, however in the end stood in the background to silently bless the male and female lead. This kind of role strongly hinted about Bai Lang's own tragedies and misfortunes in the past, and so under the influence of this full of meaning image, Bai Lang for the 3rd time achieved a height in his career. However, what didn't change was, after attaining this height, there would always be an inevitable fall. The 3rd time was the last time. This time Bai Lang faced the accusation of homosexuality. According to the stories, Bai Lang was not only gay but he was also a dirty person, because he used underhand and terrible methods to force the new star Kang Jian to be with him. Don't look at Bai Lang's cultured and clean image. Underneath it he hid a disgusting and ugly face. Isn't it obvious that the reason each time Bai Lang was able to return to the spotlight was because he had climbed into some rich man's bed? No wonder Kang Jian felt disgusted. and had no choice but to publicize everything in order to prevent more people from being hurt. As for the starring role that Bai Lang was originally supposed to have in Mountain Rain Will Come, the fact that it was changed to Kang Jian was only karma and justified comeuppance. This kind of human scum should disappear forever from the entertainment world, and never again see the light of day. Each time he saw this kind of online comment, the corners of Bai Lang's lips would lift ironically as he reminisced. All of these was nothing compared to the words Kang Jian had once spoken to him. "Oh Lang, we love each other. Clearly we haven't hurt anybody, so why do we need to hide our relationship? I know that you want the best for me. However, what I want is to stand proudly by your side. I want to hold your hand in front of the whole world. Capital I love you so much, I don't want to hide anymore. I've suffered enough. Just think about our future together. Don't we have many decades together? You know that I can't let go of you forever. How can we live the rest of our lives hiding in the shadows like sewer rats? Why don't we try? Let's try. Perhaps after publicizing our relationship, we will everyone's support and love. Look at these comments. Don't the fans always say they'll support us no matter what? What do we have to fear? Anyway, even if the whole world is against us, we will still have each other, isn't that right?" Unable to withstand Kang Jian's begging, Bai Lang finally decided to try. He was stupid, so very stupid. They had discussed it previously. Bai Lang would first make an appearance at some particular venues, in order to allow the fans some time to get accustomed to the idea. TN, basically at gay Venus, bars, etc. However, Bai Lang had only stepped half a foot out of the closet when everything changed. Kang Jian became uncontactable, and following that, poisonous and terrible rumors began to assault Bai Lang. Bai Lang was hardly able to withstand it. However, in order to fulfill his promise to his lover, Bai Lang didn't run but could only force himself to weather the storm. He had entered the previous 2 incidents in this manner. Even when his father, mother and older brother all stood out to publicly denounce him, announcing they were severing all ties with him, he could only clench his teeth and endure it. TN, remember, the slanders are not just that he was gay, but that he was someone who was dirty, slept around, forced other people to be with him, etc., etc. However, 2 weeks later, when Bai Lang finally once again received news of Kang Jian, he was met with this kind of press conference. In the Kang Jian and Shen Lingling's wedding was announced, and at the same time Kang Jian stole the role that he had been anticipating for a long time and which was supposed to help change his image. And so, everything became crystal clear. However, unfortunately, it was not until the moment just before he died that he finally understood everything. A familiar pain pierced his chest. Bai Lang paid no attention to it. In the darkness, he could only laugh at his own idiocy. Even he didn't understand why fate had chosen to return him to 10 years ago. For someone who had nothing to live for like him, what was the point? Especially for someone like him who had an unhealthy heart, and who had been told by doctors that he had to avoid becoming overly strained or too much pressure, and could only live carefully and delicately. He probably had an expiry date of only 50 or 60 years. In his last life had used it all up prematurely, but this time would the result be any different? Working hard to live. Living carefully to survive. Last lifetime Bai Lang thought he had done enough. In the end, all he had achieved was an episode of terrible pain. Fortune, fame, in the end all of it had only been empty air. If he could start again, with even a chance for revenge, so what of it? However, when thinking of those last painful moments, and those strange last images, there was still a few things that Bai Lang couldn't forget. It was as though his soul had left his body. In his previous life, as for what happened after his heart attack, Bai Lang should have had no knowledge. However, strangely, he actually knew. After he fell down, there was someone who had caught his limp body, someone who had called his name desperately, someone who had taken him to the hospital. The images which came after came into his head chaotically. All the way until the emergency doctor had announced that the resuscitation had failed and that all hope was gone for him. His parents and brother had long cut ties with a monster like him. However, at his funeral there had been a lone black umbrella shielding him, and someone had with his own 2 hands, slowly, taken his ashes into the cemetery. Bai Lang closed his eyes and recalled his unbelievable images. He had once heard the older generation say that ghosts at their own funerals would be drawn to the person who mourned them the most. Cho Chien. Bai Lang would never have thought that it would be him. Chapter 2. Bai Lang and Cho Chien had met quite early on. Long before Bai Lang first appeared on TV screens, the two of them had a meeting. At that time, Bai Lang was a third-year student at a famous university. One day on the street had been given a business card. For Bai Lang, who looked clean and good-looking, this was not the first time something like this had happened. Every time previously he had simply thrown it into the trash bin and never thought about it again. However, that year was the first time his older brother Bai Li had experienced a business failure, resulting in a large debt. Although the sum was nothing compared to the one that in the future the Bai Lang who had gotten famous would have to repay for him. However, at that time it was enough to make the Bai family suffer some pressure. Thus, Bai Lang's father and mother came to Bai Lang to discuss withdrawing him from school. Bai Li was their oldest son, and their backup son Bai Lang was someone who had been born unexpectedly and was outside their plans. In these two old people's hearts, their expectations and concerns for their eldest son Bai Li was always much higher than their second son Bai Lang, and this time if Bai Li was not able to come up with the money, he would face the penalty of a bankruptcy record, and would be a stain that he would not be able to clean off his entire life. So no matter what, the fact that the younger brother Bai Lang should reach out to help his brother was something that they felt was to be expected. Bai Lang was not surprised by this request, even though he was not close emotionally with Bai Li, who was older than him by 7 years. However, withdrawing from school would impact his future greatly. So in order to remain in school and still have money to help his family, Bai Lang sought out the company who had given him the business card. He thought about the advance signing bonus that the company promised him. If he could help Bai Li weather this initial hardship, then he could slowly make up the rest in time. However, in this world there was no such thing as a free lunch. The Bai Lang, who was innocent and naive and didn't have any society experience, fell into a trap this time. After he received the money, Bai Li's burdens were reduced greatly. However, at this time Bai Lang found out that his first job was to go to a club to accompany people to drink. He regretted it, but it was too late to back out. It was at this time that Bai Lang went out to the club that he met the VIP customer, Cho Chien. Cho Chien was immediately attracted to the pale-faced Bai Lang at first glance. It was not related to Bai Lang's appearance. It wasn't as though that in the circle of actors and models that he was used to associating in, that there wasn't anyone better looking than Bai Lang. What piqued Cho Jin's interest was the expression of panic and disgust in those eyes which the young man was unable to completely conceal. He wanted to see what it would take to make this young man yield. However, Cho Chien overestimated Bai Lang. After only a few sips of spirits, Bai Lang became dizzy and was able to push down by Cho Chien into the couch. After being held underneath his chin and kissed with tongue, with their upper thighs rubbing together, Bai Lang's eyes were filled with tears and he was played with by Cho Chien until he was trembling and humiliated and nearly came inside his pants. It was Cho Chien who was pressing Bai Lang down, who decided not to do it until the end. It was like he was playing with a small animal. He only licked Bai Lang's red ears and unexpectedly let Bai Lang go that night. But the day after Bai Lang ran away in a panic from the club, he received the notice that his contract had been transferred to the Anjiang Group's subsidiary Total Entertainment. He received a call from a slew of strangers which told him that Total Entertainment's big boss was Cho Chien and that he was very interested in taking Bai Lang as a kept lover, because he was clean and beautiful. Bai Lang was so angry his entire body trembled. He was also both shocked and scared. When Cho Chien called personally to ask him, Bai Lang rejected him with a trembling voice. To this, Cho Chien replied in his husky voice and on the phone lightly laughed at Bai Lang for his innocence and naivety. In the following weeks, Bai Lang was on tenterhooks, afraid that Cho Chien would come after him for revenge. However, nothing came of it. However, all of the good opportunities for training and exposure passed him by. The other small-name actors beside him told him that this could be counted as being slowly frozen out. If he didn't consider changing his answer, then his career as an actor would be at an end. This was something that Bai Lang could only wish for. The Bai Lang at that time only wanted to fulfill his contract at the most basic level. Once he repaid his debt, he would be free of this world of darkness and evil. However, it was as though the company wanted to keep Bai Lang hanging. Every job he got came with minimal payment, such as being the waiter at a wine exhibition or passing out flyers at a car exhibition. This way it was dragged on and on. The contract wore on for over a year, and by the time Bai Lang graduated university, he still had not repaid his debt. In this time, Bai Lang had also considered breaking the contract. However, the high cost of breaking the contract was not something that Bai Lang could repay. Also, the contract clearly stated that during the time of the contract, Bai Lang was not able to undertake any other kind of separate work. Whether it be a tutor, shop assistant, or even an assistant teacher at the school, it was all not possible. It was completely denying Bai Lang all work opportunities. Even though he graduated from university, If he wasn't able to get out of the contract, Bai Lang was still restricted and had no income. And at this time the Bai family was still not able to completely walk out from the shadow of Bai Li's failed business venture. In the face of Bai Lang's inability to work, they were filled with laments and complaints. They had completely forgotten that the entire reason that Bai Lang had gotten into this mess was because of Bai Li. After Bai Lang graduated university for 2 months, just as his situation was becoming more and more hopeless, the company suddenly and unexpectedly gave him a role in a long drama that was to run for over half a year. It was also something that suited Bai Lang's image. In order to help him undertake this role, which had a not many but also not few number of scenes, the appropriate acting lessons and training also soon followed. In the next 4 months, Bai Lang undertook a busy and varied schedule of training which was almost equal to the official artists signed to the company. Of course, the costs of such a training were to be undertaken by Bai Lang himself. According to the entertainment company, since the benefit of the training was Bai Lang, then it was up to Bai Lang to pay for it. However, it seemed that the previous incident of Bai Lang rejecting being a kept lover seemed to have been forgotten by the company. Bai Lang was suspicious about this incident, however he couldn't consider it too much. The reality of his circumstances forced him to accept these conditions. He seriously undertook his training program and completely dedicated himself to his first role in Partners for Life as a single father, Jiang and Cheng. In the drama, although Bai Lang's acting ability was shallow, however his image completely fulfilled the requirements of the role. He was someone who had not been in society for long, an innocent and awkward single father. All of this helped to cover up Bai Lang's inexperience, and the addition of the cute and genius 6-year-old child star duo helped a lot too. He acted as Bai Lang's son in the drama and helped Bai Lang become famous almost overnight. As the 6-month-long drama Partners slowly broadcasted, during this time the company also helped Bai Lang accept many advertisement endorsements. All different types of jobs came his way and further helped push Bai Lang into the road of becoming an actor, and after this it was impossible for him to get away. Even afterwards, when his fortune turned, Bai Lang did not consider leaving the road of being an actor. The first acting job really brought to Bai Lang many feelings of true joy. However, afterwards, Bai Li once again had a second business failure. This time Bai Li did not learn from the mistakes of the first time, and after falling in with some unsavory friends and believing he had some insider knowledge, he thought he could invest in an unlisted company and be able to win back a great reward. Thus he borrowed a large sum of money from an underground money lender, and placed it all into this company. However, in the end the insider knowledge he received was only empty air. Thus Bai Li fell into a huge debt. When the underground moneylender furiously pursued him to repay the money, the entire Bai family was placed under violent threats of danger. The Bai Lang, who had no house or assets, could only open his mouth to ask the entertainment company for more money in order to help his brother repay his debts and bypass the storm. From that day on, the Bai Lang, who on the screen was bright and dazzling, began to take on the dark and terrible burden of repaying debts. Because it wasn't just Bai Li's debt itself, but more because Bai Lang had been contracted to endorse several products. However, when the news of Bai Li's debts ruined Bai Lang's image, he had repay a much larger damage of defaulting on his contracts. Because his contract stipulates that he cannot have any image-damaging incidents, or be forced to pay damages. And these two incidents of great rises and great falls became like a vicious cycle. And Bai Li continued to ask Bai Lang to help him repay various debts. Thus Bai Lang's debts became more and more, to the extent that even if he wanted to buy a car, he had to consider things carefully. However, Bai Lang's debt, from the beginning to the end, had always been Cho Chien. It was Cho Chien who helped Bai Lang settle his damages for breaking his contracts. It was him that accepted all of Bai Lang's responsibilities. And the reason seemed to be just so he could at irregular intervals call Bai Lang on the phone, to discuss with him his debts and his choices in life, and ask him to reconsider his proposal, which was still valid, to be his kept lover. After seeing the gentle but stubborn Bai Lang refuse him time after time, it seemed that Cho Chien was able to get some joy out of these interactions. He loved to bring up this proposal each time Bai Lang was at his lowest, to test Bai Lang's perseverance. This kind of mocking and playful attitude provided an explanation for some things. The people beside Bai Lang, whether it be his stylist, manager, or makeup artist, were all people of skill and talent. However, each time he faced a crucial trial, they would not receive much assistance. It was as though a cold blanket always covered Bai Lang, and so his road as an actor was always difficult and shallow. It was not until the final time that Bai Lang really broke his heart. He would rather that these ugly and poisonous slanders were tricks that Cho Chien had created, rather than Kang Jian. That was why he had run over here to accuse Cho Chien. And the answer he had received was the one that until now he had been too afraid to face: Kang Jian's betrayal. It was probably good that he had died at that moment. Bai Lang always thought this. Facing the rejection of both his family and his lover, he really didn't know what else he had to live for. But he had never thought that Cho Chien, whom Bai Lang had always seen as a knife held to his throat, would be so unexpectedly sorrowful over him. Even if there must have been some element of guilt in there, Bai Lang had never blamed Cho Chien. He only remembered Cho Jin's holding the black umbrella, and his anguished profile. That image was like a stamp. From the moment it appeared, it remained stubbornly fixed in Bai Lang's mind. Di-lin lin di-lin lin. In the darkness the piercing sound of the mobile phone rang, breaking Bai Lang's reverie. He picked up his phone and took a look. It was his older brother Bai Li calling. Bai Lang's heart felt extremely complicated, because judging by the time, he knew that his older brother was calling to beg for his help. After Partners for Life broadcasted for 2 months, Bai Lang had only just signed a few important endorsement contracts. However, it was at this time that Bai Li became indebted to the underground lender for the sum of 2 million borrowed money plus 3 million interest, a total sum of 5 million. He had received his final notice. If he didn't pay within 1 week, then there would be consequences. Since fate had chosen to let Bai Lang do over everything again, then this time what should he choose? Big brother. Bai Lang waited 2 mornings before answering the phone. Little brother, you have to help me. My life is in your hands. Bai Li's cry sounded from the phone. Chapter 3. This night, starting from 2 a.m. in the morning, Bai Lang received 3 phone calls. 1 was from his older brother and 2 from his mother. All of it was to tell him how deadly the underground moneylender was and how Bai Li and the 2 old people were frightened to death. They had received several phone calls in the dead of the night with no one talking on the other end, and also people had been tailing them on their way out to buy groceries. For several nights past they had been so frightened they couldn't sleep. As for Bai Lang, who had a successful career, all he needed to do was to run by the bank tomorrow morning and borrow $5 million to help Bai Li and save their family. It was a simple no. Bai Lang lowered his head listening to their calls, and in his heart he couldn't help but recall the scenes from his previous life. Because after this incident, Bai Li would continue to borrow money time and time again, and would time and time again ask him for help to repay it. Through this incident Bai Li came to understand that if he was in debt, then Bai Lang would also suffer. So he knew that no matter what his younger brother Bai Lang would come to his aid, so he felt free to go out and do whatever he wanted. Tien, remember the bad press caused by Bai Li's debt caused Bai Lang's reputation to suffer. Hence Bai Li feels Bai Lang would help him no matter what to avoid such a situation reoccurring. All the way until 8 years later, when Bai Li had finally accumulated enough experience from this manner of using money, he was finally able to open 2 relatively successful restaurants in his hometown of T-City, and became called boss of a chain and made a minor name for himself. Then when the ugly rumors surrounding Bai Lang being gay was broken to the media, Bai Li was the first person to stand out and post on the 2 restaurants' website that the Bai family had not taught this younger son well, that they wanted to apologize to society, as well as to completely cut off all ties with Bai Lang. This notice was furiously reposted by all the paparazzi. Everyone said that even though there was no real evidence to support the rumors, Bai Lang's own family had pretty much admitted it. Hence it was clear that Bai Lang really had some serious problems. So the previously unsubstantiated slanders became real in this fashion. For Bai Lang, who had painstakingly supported Bai Li and these 2 old people these past years, he was heartlessly stabbed in the back several times. However, at that time Bai Lang still felt guilty towards his parents, because he knew that the 2 old people who had grown up in a small regional town were very traditional thinking people. Homosexuality in their eyes was something that was disgusting and perverted. Actually, when Bai Lang admitted his sexual orientation to his parents, the words they had spoken to him were even uglier than that which was being said outside by others. However, people's hearts in reality were made of flesh and blood. If it was cut, then of course it would hurt. Bai Lang had been a good and obedient son for his entire life. He was a good younger brother. However, all he had gotten in return was this kind of abandonment. Although he understood it logically, however, Bai Lang did not want to repeat this kind of experience. Especially Bai Li. When Bai Lang thought about letting Bai Li use him for money again, he really wanted to jump out of the window of the building. The phone had still been held in his hand for too long and it was slightly hot. Bai Lang paused for a few seconds and then finally decided to dial a number. In his previous life, he had never once before called this number voluntarily. However, it had always been saved inside his phone. Do. Then there was the sound of the call being connected. Who is it? Right double quotation mark. The deep and husky voice sounded angry. It seemed like the person on the other end hadn't even had time to open their eyes yet. It's me, Bai Lang. Bai Lang looked again at the digital clock. It was still August 23, 20XX, 4 a.m. in the morning. Does Mr. Cho have time to talk? Right double quotation mark. You have something on in the afternoon. Brother Lang, are you going somewhere? Right double quotation mark. The young voice on the phone belonged to Bai Lang's assistant Xia Yang Guozhang. Bai Lang had previously considered Yang Guozhang a faithful and loyal assistant who had helped him in many situations, even down to the details of selecting his lunch boxes and creating multiple accounts to help talk for him on the internet. Once Bai Lang had completely trusted him and had no guard against him at all. However, after the incident regarding the video of the yacht party, his assistant was suddenly changed from Xia Yang to Hong, whose real name was Hong. Tien, means two, referring to the fact that Hong name has two Hongs. They are different characters but pronounced similarly. It was not until then that Bai Lang knew that other than being his assistant, Xia Yang had another job, and that was selling news about the private lives of stars to the paparazzi. He clearly had such a friendly and happy face, with a liveliness that brightened the atmosphere everywhere. However, in reality he was doing all he could to get close to the assistants of other famous stars, and through casual conversation he was trying to glean information that he could sell. Until that moment, Bai Lang finally realized that the news about Bai Li's debt was leaked most likely because Xia Yang was by his side and overheard Bai Lang to Bai Li when the other person was yelling at him and begging for help. Because after all, when an underground moneylender was trying to chase a debt, they would keep it secret from the outside world. They obviously knew that Bai Li had Bai Lang behind him to help repay his debt, so the underground moneylender would not do anything so stupid as to destroy Bai Lang's fortune and also expose themselves in the process. Originally, Bai Lang had been suspicious that it was Cho Chien who had leaked the news. After all, Bai Lang had had no choice but to ask the company to lend him money. He had also received a phone call from Cho Chien asking him if he wanted to reconsider the matter of being a kept lover. But now that Bai Lang thought about it, it was more likely that Cho Chien only had a passing interest. But because of that, in this life, Bai Lang finally had the courage to make that phone call last night. Towards Xia Yang's question, Bai Lang only said vaguely, "I'm going to see the boss. I have some things to discuss with him." The boss. Big Boss Cho. The voice on the phone rose 2 octaves. How come? Is it a new drama or what? You should tell me these kind of things. Okay, is it tomorrow afternoon? I'll take Brother Lang there. Where are you meeting? Period. I'll take you, Brother Lang. You don't have a car, right? Right double quotation mark. Bai Lang laughed. This type of question was probing him for information. The Bai Lang who had mingled in the entertainment world for 10 years could already discern it. Since we are having a discussion, where else could it be? But at the company office. Is there something wrong with the company office that we have to go out and spend money? Right double quotation mark. Oh. It's like that. Xia Yang's voice fell slightly. Then what time? I'll go and pick you up. Right double quotation mark. There's no need. These 2 days I won't be turning my phone on. You should have a good rest. The advertisement shoot has been changed to the day after tomorrow. They were still filming Partners for Life. However, because the male lead had some conflicts in schedule, so they could only film a little, then rest a little. The director was so stressed his hair nearly went white. However, this let Bai Lang have quite a lot of free time, as well as to do other jobs. Tomorrow as well. What are you doing? Are you meeting Mr. Cho again? Xia Yang asked inquisitively. Tomorrow I'm going home to see my family while I have some free time. When I get busy again I won't get time. Bai Lang pretty much only went home once every few months, so his reasoning made sense. Okay. Brother Lang, once you finish your talk with Big Boss Cho, remember to tell me on. Xia Yang didn't want to give up. I hope that Brother Lang will get more roles in dramas and fly up to the sky. That way I can become the most important assistant on set. Hearty laughter sounded from inside the phone. Bai Lang thought about how much sincerity there was in that laughter. Okay. See you in 2 days. Bye, Brother Lang. 2 hours later, Bai Lang sat respectfully on the sofa outside Cho Jin's office, waiting for him. Total Entertainment was only a small subsidiary of the Anjiang Group, so Cho Chien didn't often appear here. If one wanted to see Cho Chien, then one had to make an appointment very early and come here to wait. If one wanted to talk about the Anjiang Group behind Cho Chien, everyone knew that it belonged to the Zendao's Cho family. Tien. Zendao is a place name, like Qingdao. It literally means new island. Speaking of Zendao, it was a place that only in the last 10 years had been legitimized as a designated specialty gambling area. It was known for its nightlife, exportation business and entertainment business. However, previous to that, it was a place where illegal gambling and black market exportation was rife. The illegal activities coming from on the island was very serious, and it was almost impossible to completely change its ways. Until one year when the government somehow saw the light and decided to just simply legalize its gambling and open its harbor. That way they could openly and legitimately police and regulate its activities. The Cho family had been doing business on Zendao for generations. At the time of the legalization, they were already quite powerful. Once their business became legal, they immediately began to spread their business properly and openly. They opened casino after casino, hotel after hotel, buying up bundles and bundles of land. After 10 years of washing themselves clean, they could now be considered a very legitimate entertainment, hospitality and shipping company. However, the Cho family still followed the old traditions and family business model. Their so-called professional management model was just a veneer. Underneath it, the regulations that they followed were a minority, and the ones that they flaunted was the majority. In actuality, all the power still lay in the family head. So of all the Cho's family's enterprises, not one was listed on the stock market. They simply placed it under the umbrella company called Anjiang Cho Group. In the business world, no one dared to look down on them. Tien. So basically, unlike most major corporations which are listed on the stock exchange and have a board of directors and are answerable to their shareholders, the Anjiang Group is basically run in an old school family business model where all the power lies with the head of the company, who is also the head of the family. Think more mafia or yakuza style. Hope that makes sense. I tried to follow how the author wrote it, but not sure if the translation makes as much sense as the original. As for the Cho family, which originally came from Zendao, because they were involved in the shipping business, so from an early time they had expanded to all corners of the world. In the mainland, other than shipping, the Cho family also was familiar with the hospitality business. Since unlike on Zendao, gambling was illegal on the mainland, so they turned their focus on entertainment venues, hotels and high-class clubs, as well as the related businesses of selling alcohol, cigars, and luxury cars. In the last couple of years, the Cho family had taken steps to venture into the entertainment world and had created the not large but also not small Total Entertainment Company. Originally, insiders did not have much expectations of it. They felt that the entertainment world was too complex and its ocean too deep. Just because you had money didn't mean you would become successful. However, within a few years, Total Entertainment had debuted a successful male idol group, R-Red, as well as 2 winners of the Golden Coil Trophy. Tien. A made-up singing award like the Grammys. In addition, they had signed the young movie Emperor Kwon, who had been developing overseas, which was considered a coup for them. These kind of showy successes had smashed the glasses of many insiders, causing them to realize that once you had both money, then no ocean was too deep for you to swim. As for Cho Chien, who in the rumors was the illegitimate son of the previous generation's head of the Cho family, in the beginning he was just a small-time shipping boss that worked at the docks and was often at sea. And the family did not place much importance on him. However, for reasons people didn't know, in the last few years he had suddenly become powerful, to the point where he behaved as though he was a successor of the family. Grandfather Cho, the head of the family, really had in the last half year given over control of the family to the just over 30-year-old Cho Chien to manage. Especially the heart of the family, which was its shipping business, had caused Cho Jin's personal worth to skyrocket to over 10 billion in one stroke. However, Cho Jin's outer appearance completely did not match with the appearance of a company big boss. He had a tanned complexion, untamed half-long hair, and always wore a shirt that was never completely buttoned up. In front of his chest he always wore a thick and large gold chain. Even after he took over control of the company, he still looked like a shipping worker. It was only that he had changed his flower print shirt to a more high-quality silk shirt, that's all. Even so, it couldn't obscure Cho Jin's very strong and tall body, his handsome and deep-set features, as well as his unique personal charisma. Even though his style was crude, It gave him a sort of wild and untamed handsomeness. The year Cho Chien took over Total Entertainment, he had been listed by a tabloid publication as the #1 most desired gold master. It was a fortunate coincidence that his name also contained the word Chien. It was unknown if it was because of this. However, Cho Chien loved to make this kind of joke. Bai Lang waited quietly for a few minutes. In his heart he still had not fully made up his mind. In his previous life's 10 years, Bai Lang had more or less heard stories about Cho Jin's methods. He looked strong and generous, decisive and practical. However, he also had a vicious personality. He knew how to hide his intentions and motives before pulling out a knife that could kill with one stroke. Towards his enemies, he was undoubtedly their greatest nightmare. If not for the scene he had seen from his previous life, then Bai Lang would never have believed that he had been special in any way to Cho Chien. In Cho Jin's position, how many small starlets would have enthusiastically warmed his bed? Bai Lang's rejection really was something that was unimportant. He wasn't the most talented or eye-catching person within the entertainment circle, and Cho Chien really never took his rejection much to heart. Bai Lang was clear in his heart even in his previous life that Cho Chien had helped him in some small ways. However, the motivation behind that should have been to play with him, so as to entertain himself by seeing the drama unfold. But as for what Cho Chien had done for him after he died, to Bai Lang it really was something completely out of his expectation. Even from the perspective of a friend, someone that would mourn for him, then on his road of suffering and fighting, it seemed like there was at least one person that recognized it. After being rejected by so many people, Cho Jin's one act of kindness was etched deep inside Bai Lang's heart. However, in his previous life Bai Lang had been a small star that resolutely refused to bow his head. But this time he had voluntarily sent himself to Cho Jin's door. Bai Lang laughed mockingly to himself. Like this, would things between them still be same? Outside the door there was a flurry of activity. He heard the sound of people enthusiastically welcoming their boss. A few moments later the door was brusquely and roughly pushed open. There was a cigar dangling from the corner of Cho Jin's mouth. His head was tilted and his eyes swept over Bai Lang with interest. "Little White Rabbit, you were looking for me." Tien, the Bai in Bai Lang's name translates to white. Chapter 4. Little White Rabbit was the nickname that Cho Chien had given Bai Lang the first time they had met. In this way he had called Bai Lang for 10 years. Bai Lang knew there was no chance of him making Cho Chien change it, so he didn't bother to waste any energy on it. Actually listening to it now, there was some sense of nostalgia. Bai Lang stood up and nodded at Cho Chien. "Yes, thank you Mr. Cho for finding the time to see me." Actually the Cho Chien of 10 years later didn't change much. Especially his face, which wouldn't lose to many young stars. And his wild charisma, which when Cho Chien was young, made him seem older than his age, would also when he was older make it difficult to tell his age. A cigarette dangled casually from Cho Jin's mouth and he ambled over carelessly to another couch and threw himself onto it. "Sit, say whatever it is you want to say." Bai Lang sat properly. He didn't beat around the bush. "I want to borrow money from Mr. Cho." "Oh." Cho Chien raised his eyebrow. He didn't disguise his surprise. "How much?" Right double quotation mark. 5 million, Bai Lang said calmly. "In cash." 5 million in cash. Cho Chien smoked his cigar. Very slowly he blew a puff at Bai Lang. "That's a lot of money. Ah. Do you mind letting me know the reason?" Right double quotation mark. "Of course. My brother Bai Li owes 5 million to an underground moneylender. There is no choice but to repay it." Bai Lang lowered his eyes and considered whether or not he should pretend to be the previous him, naive with unrealistic stubbornness and perseverance. But after thinking about it for a few moments he thought, what was the point? If it's not managed well, then if the news is leaked, then I'm afraid that it will affect my endorsement deals. After finishing speaking, Bai Lang couldn't resist the urge to turn his head and cough twice because of the second-hand smoke. Cho Jin's eyes flashed with obvious calculation. He seemed to be questioning of Bai Lang and his suddenly different behavior. "But you don't look nervous. Ah, so it seems like you don't really care if it's repaid or not." Right double quotation mark. Cho Chien spoke lightly like a feather, but in reality he really immediately grasped the crucial point. Because if Bai Lang didn't help borrow to repay the money, then the misfortune Bai Li would bring to Bai Lang was the damages from those endorsement deals. However, if Bai Lang helped him, then the person who would take on the burden of those debts would be Bai Lang himself. No matter if he borrowed or didn't borrow. In actuality there was no difference to Bai Lang. The only real difference was whether or not his parents and his brother could live peacefully. "You're right." Bai Lang could not help but smile bitterly. Whether or not it's repaid makes no difference to me. In the end, it will be me that owes money. So I want to ask Mr. Cho for help. After lending this time, to make sure that there isn't a second time. This will be better for the company too. Am I so effective? How come I didn't know? Cho Chien snuffed out his cigar and raised his chin. Why don't you explain it to me? Right, double quotation mark. To be your kept lover. The 5 million is the price. Bai Li will never dare to touch someone who is Mr. Zhou's person. Bai Lang's voice was steady, however he still couldn't help but lower his gaze. Cho Chien froze for a few seconds, and then suddenly laughed uproariously. Keep you? I didn't hear wrong, right? Bai Long couldn't control a flush from rising onto his face. He still remembered the first time he rejected Cho Chien. The way he had spoken had been extremely iron-willed, even though at that time he had been frightened to death. So right now, in the face of Cho Jin's loud laughter, Bai Lang could only mock himself in his heart. 2 years ago, what did you say? I still remember, ha. You said something like your morals would never allow you to cross that line, and? Didn't you want to report me to the police? Cho Chien laughed loudly for some time. After finishing, he even used his hand to wipe away his tears. Now you want me to keep you? You're good. I forgive you for waking me up in the middle of the night. Hearing all of this makes it worth it. Bai Lang's mouth jerked into a mocking smile. Back then, when he was called a little white rabbit, it really wasn't for no reason. Then, what does Mr. Cho think? Right, double quotation mark. Cho Jin's mirth faded and became a light and vague smile. Shouldn't you ask me first whether or not when I answered the phone last night, if there was anyone sleeping beside me? Right, double quotation mark. After he spoke, Bai Lang paused for a few moments. Afterwards, there was a faint sense of disappointment. Because from Cho Jin's words, Bai Lang immediately understood that the other man had taken him as yet another young star who would abandon his morals for the sake of money. After all, he had come here to sell himself voluntarily, and something like that obviously wasn't worth much. This meant that between him and his previous life and Cho Chien there was a faint sense of respect and a blurred type of camaraderie. However, now that he had asked Cho Chien this question, this type of camaraderie no longer existed. However, Bai Lang did not regret his actions. The reason he asked Cho Chien this question was also to thank him for what he had done for him at the very end. He wanted to thank him for holding up that umbrella. In his rebirth, Bai Lang didn't really have anything to give Cho Chien. Only this. To use his body as a recompense. Thinking about it, it was somewhat dog-blooded. However, thinking about his body, he didn't know how many years he had left in this lifetime. If Cho Chien wanted it, then he could just take it, and if he didn't, then at least Bai Lang had done his best to repay him in his heart. As for Bai Li, if Cho Chien rejected his offer, then he supposed that the company would not act as before and keep lending money to him that had no house and no assets, and only 2 short months of fame. If he didn't have any backers, then there was no way of borrowing 5 million from the bank. If this was how it turned out, then really there was no way of him getting money to help Bai Li, and so this path was completely cut off for him. It can also be considered a way of finishing things cleanly. So Bai Lang didn't force anything. He expressed that he understood. If there was, then it's my mistake. After he finished, then he got up to leave. I still want to thank Mr. Cho for your time today. Bai Lang nodded at Cho Chien. I won't disturb you any longer. Cho Jin's eyes sharpened. He stared fixedly at Bai Lang like a poisonous snake. What about the money? You don't want it? Right, double quotation mark. Bai Lang paused. To find someone with Mr. Zhou's qualities will be difficult. However, at least I can find. He didn't finish speaking before Cho Chien suddenly reached and snatched him around the wrist and jerked him back forcefully. That Bai Lang's entire person fell into him. Bai Lang was shocked. However, after the last few days of topsy-turvy events, he didn't put up much resistance to the fact that his entire person was now pressing down on Cho Jin's body. Bai Lang was almost 180 centimeters tall. However, he was still shorter than Cho Chien by half a head, and that wasn't even mentioning their difference in muscle tone. Bai Lang obediently let Cho Chien raise his chin up and was gazed at calculatingly. Cho Chien narrowed his eyes. You've changed a lot. When a rabbit is in a dire situation, it can also bite people, Bai Lang calmly replied under Cho Jin's piercing gaze. Cho Chien stared at Bai Lang for several seconds. He seemed to think of something, but in the next moment he suddenly used force and, holding Bai Lang's chin, forcefully kissed him. It was an unpolite kiss, extremely searing. The tyrannical tongue seemed to want to lay claim to its kingdom, thrusting deep into Bai Lang's mouth. Bai Lang couldn't help but freeze slightly. Even though in his previous life he had gone out with Kang Jian, however, The two of them rarely had any violent interactions, and the strong scent of tobacco in Chojin's mouth made Bai Lang feel slightly dizzy. However, under Chojin's strong offense, Bai Lang was able to recover and remind himself to relax and allow Chojin's actions. So once Cho Chien finally released Bai Lang, he dangerously narrowed his eyes. "It seems you're more experienced than before." Right? Bai Lang slightly pressed his numb lips together. Don't force yourself. It was impossible for him to return to the naive youth of his previous life. Cho Jin's expression became suddenly dark. However, it quickly faded because he once again grasped Bai Lang's chin and kissed him again. However, before this, Cho Chien gave him his answer. "Then serve me well. $5 million, settled." The next day, a silver limited edition SUV came to a stop outside the apartment that was Bai Lang's old home in T-City. This was an old apartment with 6 floors. 8 years ago, the two elderly Bai parents, who had been at that time farmers in an even more remote area, had caught on to the development wind. Their farm had been taken back by the government and they had received a sum of money. At that time, they had listened to the newly graduated from University Bai Li and came to T-City to purchase 2 apartments in this old building, one upstairs and one downstairs. The two old people considered it carefully. Now that they didn't have their farm, they could only rely on their sons. If they purchased like this, then they would live downstairs and their oldest son Bai Li would live upstairs after getting married. That way they could take care of each other and help raise their grandchildren. As for their youngest son Bai Lang, well, it was up to him to make his own way in the world. The two old people didn't have the resources to help him do anything. So in fact, Bai Lang had only lived here for a few years before going to university in the city. So he wasn't extremely familiar with this place. Bai Lang wore large sunglasses and descended from the car. Today he was wearing a light gray long-sleeved shirt and pantsuits. It was very different from his on-screen white t-shirt and blue jeans fashionable look. It was much more mature. The things that Bai Lang had experienced in his previous life were not fake. Right now his thoughts and actions were very different to the way people in his generation behaved. Bai Lang held the car door, bent over and said to his driver of today, "Thank you, Mr. Cho. I can go up by myself." T-City and a city were separated by around 5 hours drive. Approximately, it was at the limit of somewhere one could drive to and from in one day. Cho Chien, who was sitting in the driver's seat and smoking as usual, turned his head. "On. Do you need me to make an appearance?" Right? Bai Lang lightly smiled. To some people, they might not recognize a person, but they will definitely recognize money. Cho Chien looked at Bai Lang a few times. Since yesterday's exchange was settled, the Bai Lang in front of his eyes became more and more difficult to understand. "Okay. I'll wait here then." Cho Chien took out something from his pocket and threw it Bai Lang. "But since I'm your gold master, and the purchase has been settled, then we can forget about our responsibilities." Bai Lang reached out his hand and received it. When it was in his hand, he saw that it was a silver watch. In the front it was filled with silver-colored loose diamonds. Only on the 4 positions of the time indicators it was changed to 4 blue gemstones. It was lucky that the metal shape was very sleek and shapely. Otherwise, it could only be described using the terms blingy and ostentatious. Bai Lang didn't say anything. He only put matter-of-factly placed the watch onto his left arm and lightly covered it with his sleeve. "Thank you, Mr. Cho." "Are you still calling me Mr. Cho?" Cho Chien raised his chin. "Brother Cho." Bai Lang changed it. Cho Chien made an odd noise, and then smiled in a playful manner. "After you complete your business, then following that it's time for our personal business." Bai Lang nodded his head slightly. He didn't reply to these words and only closed the door and went up the stairs. The Bai family had 2 apartments. They had purchased the 5th floor and the 6th floor. It was a small apartment that didn't have an elevator. So the higher levels were cheaper than the lower levels. Bai Lang slowly walked up the stairs that were both familiar and unfamiliar. The memories that he didn't want to remember floated through his head. You unfilial son. How dare you come back? Right? Do you want your brother and us to be cursed to death? Do you want to force us to die? Right? Do you know how the neighbors talk about us? They say we have a perverted son, thinking all day about men's bottoms. What are you doing? Do you know what this would do to your brother? You almost ruined his business, don't you know? If you want to be disgusting, then go be disgusting yourself. Don't drag us down with you. Get out. What did you say? You still have something to say. Get out. I'll beat you to death. Beat you to death. What kind of curse have I been placed under? Why did I give birth to a sick thing like you? Dear God, After that there had been beating and kicking. At that time his mother had torn her voice hoarse, crying and screaming. Those cries still echoed in his ears. His father had only given him the sight of his fleeing back. As for his brother Bailey, he only said with a bitter face that he never thought his own younger brother was like this. These events from his previous life made Bai Lang stand at the door of his house for a long time before he finally pressed the doorbell. After university, there was no longer his room inside his house, and so of course he also didn't have a key. The door was opened very quickly. It was Bailey whose eyes were bloodshot. "Little brother, did you get the money?" Right double quotation mark. A few minutes later, Bai Lang sat inside the living room. He was assaulted on all sides from questions from Father Bai, Mother Bai and Bai Li. "Where's the money?" "Ah Lang, you borrowed it, didn't you?" Mother Bai directly asked impatiently. "Your brother is waiting for the money to save his life. You don't live here, so you don't know what we've been through these few days. Every time we pick up the phone there's strange laughter from the other end, and every time we go out there's someone in black following. They're not even scared of the police. They just keep following. How can we live like this? That's right, little brother. You definitely got the money right." Bai Li grabbed Bai Lang's hand in a crazed manner. His grip was so strong he left a red mark. "I only have 3 days left. 3 days. If I can't come up with the money, then both me, Mom and Dad will be over." Father Bai and Mother Bai also were beyond logic. They said in a panicked manner, "Yes. Don't you spend all day every day filming TV and movies? Exclamation mark. You should have earned a lot of money, right? How come you're not talking? It's such a small thing. Why can't you help your brother?" Right double quotation mark. "Mom, 5 million is not a small sum." Bai Lang finally raised his head and interrupted Mother Bai's speech. "Be honest, Lang. Are you blaming me for being biased?" Exclamation mark. "Is it because you blame us for giving the house to your brother? Is it what it is? However, he's your brother. There's no need to separate things between brothers. We've raised you for so long, eating, using. What did we not give you? And you picked this timing to start to nitpick. Aren't you being extremely heartless?" Originally Bai Lang had wanted to reach into his pocket to take out the check, but after hearing Mother Bai speak, a thought that he had never had in his previous life suddenly struck him. Right now these 2 houses, if you sell them, isn't it worth around 5 million? Chapter 5. "What did you say?" Mother Bai's face changed. Even her voice changed. "This is all we have. If we sell the house, then where will we and your brother live? You actually dare tell us to sell the house? I just knew your motives weren't good. Now that you're famous you want to throw away your old father and your mother. You're so cruel. How did I give birth to a miscreant like you?" Father Bai saw that Mother Bai's curses were becoming more and more fierce and hurried to stop her. "Stop talking so much. Lang didn't mean it like that." Father Bai turned to Bai Lang and said in a persuading manner, "Lang, we can't sell the house. These years, the price of houses has been rising like crazy. If we sell, we can't find another one this good that's also upstairs and downstairs, 2 levels. How can we live so comfortably? You need to lend us the money." "Then why don't you mortgage the house?" Bai Lang asked calmly. "You can repay the 5 million slowly. It would be better than taking it all out in one go. If in the beginning, older brother finds repaying the mortgage difficult, then I should be able to help him." After speaking like this, there appeared a hesitant and unsure expression on Father Bai's face. "But what if we can't repay it?" Mother Bai saw his attitude and immediately rushed to interrupt. "What if you abandon us and don't help us? How can you promise that we'll be able to keep up the repayments? If you dare touch the house, then I'll fight you to the death." Mother Bai slapped the table and stared viciously at Father Bai to warn him. Father Bai, who had a weak personality, didn't dare to cross Mother Bai. He could only turn his head to beg Bai Lang for help. When he met Bai Lang's calm and measured gaze, he finally couldn't open his mouth. Because if they continued in this manner, they would be forcing Bai Lang to lend them the money, but at the same time was unwilling to sell the house, not even one of the two. The reality of the matter was becoming more and more clear. Bai Li saw the situation wasn't right and he also interrupted, "Little brother, I know you're unhappy regarding the situation with the house, but think about it. Haven't father and mother taken good care of you? From the moment you started working to right now, have they asked you for money? Right now to nitpick about this kind of thing, isn't that being very cold-hearted? Right double quotation mark. Also, right now the fact that I'm in this kind of urgent situation, isn't it also for you? Think about it. If news about this kind of thing leaks out, then would an image that you built up with such hard work be all wasted? Money is just a momentary thing, but only with reputation can you earn more money. You should be more clear about this kind of thing than me, right? By the end, Bai Li's words carried with it the hint of a threat. Bai Lang looked at Bai Li. His gaze was cold. Towards Bai Li, Bai Lang didn't need to be polite. He reached into his pocket and took out his bank card and with a pa sound slapped it onto the low table. You can go and check how much money is inside. I only just finished repaying the 400,000 I borrowed for you before. You should be more clear about this kind of thing than me. All the money for taking care of mother and father has pretty much all be spent on you. Bai Li's face was extremely ugly. So what you're saying is, you're really going to watch me die, is that it? Right? If you don't have money, then you can borrow it. If the bank won't lend you, then can't the company do it? Mother Bai continued to cry and yell on the top of her lungs. Ayo. Old man, look at this heartless child you've raised. Doesn't even want to help his own mother, father and brother. Back then, why did we even raise a second one? If we aborted, then we could have saved ourselves so much trouble. This type of words, even in his previous life, Bai Lang had never heard it. The Bai Lang of the previous life had never come home to talk about this matter, and had only obediently and hurriedly sent the money over. He had never thought about disobeying his parents. Right now, the reality, which was becoming more and more apparent, made Bai Lang laugh mockingly at himself. Finally, he reached into his pocket and took out the check and placed it onto the table. If you can't bear to sell the house, then sell your son, Ba. When Bai Li saw the check, he immediately rushed forward and snatched it. He laughed gleefully. This is this big boss Joe's check. It's the type that can be redeemed for cash. It's exactly 5 million. Lang, if you had it, why didn't you say earlier? Father Bai still had some conscience. He hurried to ask, sell our son. What do you mean? Where does that money come from? Right? Bai Lang stood up. Because he didn't want to waste any more time. The money from selling my body. $5 million to sleep with a man. Sleep with a man. Mother Bai screamed loudly. You're a prostitute. Right? Bai Lang jerked the corner of his mouth. I can also not be one. Return the check to me. Are you joking? Bai Li clutched the check and retreated one step. Father Bai and Mother Bai had clearly been shocked stupid by such a statement. For the time being, they didn't know how to react. There's still 3 days. You can consider the circumstances. Bai Lang looked at the 3 people in front of him. The usually soft-hearted Bai Lang in the end decided to give them one last chance. There's 2 paths. Mortgage the house. In the beginning, I can help with the repayments. Otherwise, take the 5 million. If you want my help, this is the only way I can help. Bai Lang walked towards the door. He opened the door and added a sentence, but once it's sold, it's gone. After all, once I'm not a virgin, I'm not worth anything anymore, isn't that right? Right? Father Bai's face was white as a sheet. Finally, he took a tiny step forward. Lang, you. Bai Lang turned his head and looked at Father Bai. But Father Bai hesitated for a few moments, and in the end what he said was, do you really mind about the house? As in he still thinks all this is because Bai Lang is being deliberately difficult because he is unhappy that they bought an apartment for Bai Li and not for him. Bai Lang felt something within his heart break again. He shook his head and lost his smile. There was a pacha sound and the Bai family door closed behind him. Bai Lang controlled himself and didn't look back, and walked towards that silver SUV. As soon as he got into the car, the scent of smoke wafted over to him. Within the smog, Cho Chien turned his head and his gaze swept over him. You're still a virgin. Right? Bai Lang stilled. He thought about how Cho Chien knew what he had said earlier. At this time, Cho Chien casually took out an earpiece from behind his right ear and carelessly tossed it aside. It looked like Cho Chien had been listening the whole time. Bai Lang paused for a while, then his gaze turned to the watch on his left wrist. Bai Lang adjusted the watch and smiled bitterly. Is this the most expensive type of dog leash? Right? Cho Chien shrugged his shoulders. Whether or not you want to wear it is up to you. He had placed a bug on his body but then had deliberately told him about it. Bai Lang really didn't know what Cho Chien was thinking. But anyway, it didn't matter. As for what happened just now in the Bai family, it didn't matter to Bai Lang if Cho Chien knew or not. Suddenly Cho Chien said, what if after 3 days the check hasn't been cashed? Right? Bai Lang smiled. Then I'll sleep with you once. For free. Oh. Cho Jin's face was full of interest. Then haven't I gotten a big bargain? Right double quotation mark. Bai Lang's smile faded. He looked outside the window. That's why the probability is very low. It's like winning the jackpot. Cho Chien looked at Bai Lang's profile and didn't say anything. He started up the car and forcefully pressed on the accelerator. The silver SUV made a loud noise and sped away. Not 2 hours later, when Cho Jin's car had not even returned to a city from T-City, the bank called according to Cho Jin's instructions to notify him that the 5 million had already been cashed. At that time, Bai Lang looked out of the window and thought about the significance of his rebirth. The next morning Bai Lang was woken up by the sound of digital music, on a large and deep blue bed. He was wrapped in a suede quilt. The touch of it felt as delicate on his skin as the most expensive brocade. It was very cool and relaxing. Bai Lang couldn't help lifting up a pillow to cover his ears, like a turtle who wanted to continue sleeping in his shell. All the way until there was the sound of a pala, and the sound of something being smashed against the ground. The noisy alarm music finally stopped. However, the sudden silence actually made Bai Lang finally wake up from the state of heavy sleep. He opened his eyes and saw an expanse of tanned skin floating in front of his gaze. The naked back bore a perfect and beautifully even muscle tone, and right now it was rising and falling slowly. Underneath the wide shoulders was a strong waist, and what was below that was wrapped in the same blanket as Bai Lang. This person's head also practically rested on the same pillow. Bai Lang dumbly closed his eyes. In a few seconds he recalled what had happened the previous night. Then he slowly got up and slowly made his way towards the bedroom's large and spacious ensuite bathroom. Yesterday Cho Chien had driven back towards A City, and then without any further discussion, the two of them had come here. This was a luxuriously renovated apartment that was at the same time as cold as a furniture display home. Cho Chien entered the door, threw the key to one side, pushed Bai Lang against the door and began kissing him. This kiss lasted until they ended up in the bedroom's large bed, and then the two people, very effectively, did what they had come here to do. In this manner, they didn't even have dinner. Bai Lang directly fell unconscious and slept until the next day. The alarm just now was something which Bai Lang, with his last shred of rationality, had placed into his phone last night. After having a shower and ignoring the pain from his waist, Bai Lang picked up the discarded clothes on the floor and dressed himself. He tried the mobile phone which had a few moments ago being smashed onto the ground. Luckily it still switched on with no problem. The time from now to when he had to be on set for the makeup for the advertisement was 1 hour. Bai Lang guessed that by the time it would take for him to get to his own apartment from here, followed by reaching the set, but he had no choice but to go home first. He couldn't wear these kind of ripped and missing buttons clothes to the set. There was no choice but to be late. Bai Lang looked at the Cho Chien who still had his head buried in the pillow and thought that it was not necessary to say any goodbye. He was just intending to turn and leave when his foot accidentally kicked something. When he looked down he saw it was the diamond watch which had also been thrown aside last night. Bai Lang paused for a moment. However, thinking about right now how he should behave obediently to show his sincerity, so he bent over and picked up the watch and placed it on his wrist. Once he clipped on the watch, Cho Jin's head appeared above the sheets, his voice deep from sleep. "You want to go? Right double quotation mark." Bai Lang adjusted his clothes. He nodded his head beside the door. "In the morning I still have some scheduled matters. I need to go home first, so I'll be leaving first." "What kind of big matter is it?" "Cancel it." Cho Chien narrowed his eyes and raised his head. There was an angry and fierce aura about him, making it seem as though I just had a one-night stand. "Come here." Bai Lang paused and then came closer to the bed. Once he got near he was grabbed by Cho Chien. After some movements, Bai Lang was once again pressed underneath Cho Jin's body. Cho Jin's eyes were not completely open yet. He pressed against Bai Lang and sniffed him. "Did you just wash? You smell pretty good." Bai Lang opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling. But because Cho Chien seemed as though he was about to fall asleep again, he said quietly, "Uni's clothing endorsement. If I skip work without reason, then it's 200,000 per day. If I ruin their image, then it's 1 million. I just signed last week." Cho Chien said lazily. "What are you scared of? If it falls through, then I'll just find you a bigger endorsement." "No big deal," Bai Lang said helplessly but seriously. "Then how should I explain to Xia Yang?" Right double quotation mark. "Xia Yang. Right double quotation mark. My assistant." Cho Chien laughed lightly into Bai Lang's chest. He didn't seem sleepy any longer. "How do you want to explain it?" Right double quotation mark. Bai Lang was silent for a few seconds. He wanted to try and figure out the hidden meaning behind Chojin's words. Right now Chojin's attitude seemed to be that he wanted to let everyone know about their ambiguous relationship. But why? This wasn't a good thing for the company, even if Cho Chien wasn't worried about this kind of small money. Or was it because his behavior had changed too much from before and Cho Chien found it suspicious, so he was trying to test him? Was him wearing the watch not enough? Thinking about Chojin's poisonous snake nickname from his previous life, Bai Lang thought that even if he tried to guess it he wouldn't be able to. He only raised his head and lightly stroked Chojin's hair as though to comfort him. How about I ask someone to send some food over? And some clothes? That way we won't be so pressed for time. Cho Chien stilled. Then he said with a dissatisfied expression, "You still intend on going? Right? Yes, Bai Lang patted Chojin's head. The 5 million has all been spent. So right now I need money. Cho Chien gave him a patronizing look and then rolled off him and hugged his pillow instead. I want the hot soy milk from the end of Erlang Street, egg pancake and fried breadstick with a double serving of onions. Bai Lang laughed. He got up and made a phone call. But it wasn't to Xia Yang but to the professional errand runner whose number he had saved in his phone. This kind of errand person who could help you buy things and bring it to your house was a booming business in a city in the last few years. This person was someone that Xia Yang helped him find. If it's possible, I would like to change Xia Yang. He is not good at keeping his mouth shut. Bai Lang finished his phone call and told Cho Chien. Oh. Fine. Who do you want? Right? Hong Hong Ba. Bai Lang spoke without thinking. In his previous life, although it was many years later that the large-headed Hong had been sent to him, but in their discussions with each other, Bai Lang knew that Hong Hong had started working at Total Entertainment as an assistant from a very early time, even before Bai Lang. Hong Hong. Chojin's voice changed. Bai Lang felt a bit strange. He could only add as an explanation, I've heard people talk about him. Oh. Cho Chien got up from the bed and laughed in a significant way. Your appetite is not small. You want to steal my assistant? Ah. Bai Lang stilled. Other than realizing that things were not ideal, his heart was filled with questions.